Marc, you are a busy guy.
Say the least.
Yeah. About a decade ago, you blew the whistle on Washington's water problem. And then you did the really sort of important science that blew the whistle on Flint's water problem. And just this week, you've been feuding with Mark Ruffalo. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, where do I find the time, huh? Well, I mean, starting with the most recent event, I mean, it was very disheartening, but actors have been coming to Flint and by and large been giving their moral support and bottled water. And one actor, Mr. Ruffalo, came to town and sort of became an opportunist, a pseudoscientist, and he started telling people just outrageous things about the safety of their water. He claimed that you could breathe lead from water in the showers and that residents were in danger from that the chemical that the CDC and EPA and everyone agreed was necessary to fix Flint's pipes would give people low blood pressure. And they started a new technology that measured chloroform in showers, and they issued press releases saying they found dangerous chemicals in Flint water heaters, and these are the same chemicals we've known about for 40 years, and we have regulations to protect people. So unfortunately, I saw the harm that this was doing to people. Moms were calling me in Flint and saying that they weren't letting their kids wash their hands or take baths, and there was a spike in gastrointestinal upset. The emergency response has been delayed because federal employees are running around responding to these pseudoscientific claims. And I tried to reason with them for a month and get them to retract their false statements, and they were not reasonable people, so I had to call them out on my webpage.
Yeah. This sort of gets to the heart of what we're here to talk about today, which is science as a public good and really the public integrity of science. Absolutely. And I thought to anchor that discussion, I wanted to hear from you, just in a general sense, what is science for? And after you've sort of told us what science is for, why is it the kind of thing that we should fund publicly?
Well, I think there's an ideal, and the ideal is that scientists should be seeking the truth and trying to help people. And to the extent we get away from that ideal, to the extent that science becomes more and more about us, about fame, about publications, about funding, about advancing the policies of our institution, that we're really on dangerous ground. Because at some point, the public begins to realize that we are about us, that we do not have the public's best interest at heart. And that's very dangerous because science has advanced hand in hand with civilization through what I call the virtuous cycle, wherein the public has supported us, given us funding. We, in return, have given them truth, improved lives, improved products, and in general, they've been appreciative, and they've continued the cycle. Mm-hmm. And the second they start thinking that we're more like a business, we're more in it for ourselves, that cycle is in danger. And that's what I speak of. Yeah.
What are the current aspects of our funding system now that make it so that sort of the public doesn't trust us as much?
You know, part of this, we've done it to ourselves. When I came into academia, indeed, it was in a time when publications and funding were starting to become important as metrics that we measured each other by. When you judge who's better in a field, who should get promotions, who should get tenure. What are the things we look at today? It's how much funding did you bring in? How many papers have you published? The fame aspect of it. And of course, this has always been there. This is nothing new. But it was never such a driving part of the equation as it is today. I recently did a survey of professors in the 1950s, 1960s. These are National Academy of Engineering, National Academy of Science people. I said, how did you decide who was better, back in the day? And they said, it is crazy. I mean, we never talked about dollars. We never talked about who had the most papers. We sat around and we asked who was doing the most good for the world. And they were just shocked. And when they go to conferences today that people are introduced, when here's so-and-so, 200 papers, over 200 million, over $20 million of research, and so A lot of this we have done to ourselves through these perverse metrics, incentives, financial targets that we're all seeking.
Are there better metrics that you can think? I mean, it sounds like you're describing really a qualitative system when people sort of sit in a room and say, hey, that guy's good or that woman's good. You could also see how a sort of informal system like that could allow corruption and cronyism to develop.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I understand the appeal of a formula. You put in a number of papers, financial, how much you're bringing into the school, how many awards you got, crank it out, get a number, and then rank people. I've seen spreadsheets that do that. So I understand the appeal, especially to scientists and engineers who are just so quantitative.
Mm-hmm.
But, at the end of the day, is that giving you a meaningful number? Is that what we value? And I guess it is, unfortunately. So yes, you do have to get, I think, into the weeds of discussing what is the value of this person's work to the world, seriously.
You said that there's been some areas in the sciences that have been overfunded because there's, quote unquote, sort of the sexy areas. What are some of those that are sort of receiving too much funding just because of sort of flash and appeal?
Okay. Well, I'm not going to mention those names because I still want to have a career in
Should I?
science as an engineer. I'm not crazy, okay?
Yeah.
But, we have this funding because we're competing with funding for other areas of society. And the grants people who run these agencies, they need to sell things to Congress. And you need to sell, this is the new era. You are going to reinvent and transform the U.S. economy. This is the new buzzword. That's the new buzzword. That's the new buzzword. And these come down to us in this top-down model to the point where about 70% of the grants we write, you have to spout these buzzwords to even be in the game. If you are not in this top-down world, you're not going to be competitive. And so is that the best model? It's certainly one model. I support it. But too much of our money has been devoted, too much of our funding is being devoted to these top-down models, and too little of our funding is being devoted to bottom-up models, where scientists are out in the world working with normal people, learning from people about their problems, and then discovering new areas of research and benefiting from their insights. So we need more of a balance, I think.
Another issue that you've highlighted is the funding for science based on potential future IP revenues for the university. And you've specifically said that this is part of running a university almost as a business model.
Exactly.
And I wondered that if we had let's say the dean of a prestigious research university up here, what would she tell us? Might she say, hey, look, we have brought more money in for scientific research this way than ever before?
Yeah, I mean, there's this idea that if we invest more in work that creates intellectual property, patents, you can create this revenue stream that not only benefits the professor, but it benefits the institution. And people go, that's a new source of revenue. Who could be against getting a new source of revenue? But first off, how many of those intellectual property offices actually earn more money than they spend? It's a minority. Incredible amounts of money are being wasted on IP. And it's putting forth impediments to research where researchers used to share data more freely. And now it's like, no, I got to get the patent first before I give you this information. That is slowing down scientific progress. And here's the real danger. In the quest for creating this new net revenue, what if we kill the goose that's been giving us the golden eggs, which is the public, which is our relationship with the public? To the extent that the public feels that we're operating as a business, that we're in this for ourselves, they are going to decrease the amount of funding they can give us, and who can blame them? So to some extent, by seeking out these new sources of revenue, I think we are killing the goose that's been giving us the golden egg. And we sit here and we lament that the fact that the public doesn't support us, that the public is giving less and less money to public institutions. And we look at it from the perspective of they're betraying us, but what about our part of this problem? How much of this are we bringing on ourselves?
You mentioned earlier that scientists face a sort of perverse set of incentives as they go about their career and they choose what fields they want to research and what projects to pursue.
Sure.
Can you give me a more tangible sense of that? Like, what does that look like for a young scientist when they're kind of...
Well, I mean, anyone who's sought tenure, here's the rules, okay? You either produce according to these metrics or you will be fired, period. You get the requisite number of papers, you bring in that requisite number of research dollars, and how do you do that? You have to go to the top-down model. You have to go where the money is. You have to play the game. So to some extent, this system has really had, just very adverse effects, I think, on academia. In some ways, it makes professors cowards. We have all this academic freedom in this country. We have tenure as professors, but we are the last people on the planet to exercise that freedom. It really is incredible. In my work, where I confronted government funding agencies, professors just look at me like, "Are you crazy? You are committing career suicide." No professor speaks out against a potential funding agency, no matter how egregious their behavior. And so that's, part of the reason what happened in DC and Flint is so terrifying is because the agencies that cause these problems are the environmental policemen that we pay to protect us, and instead they betrayed us. And who's going to call them out on it? Who's going to be crazy enough to do that? Not many people will go that path.
Have you seen the funding agencies come around post-DC and Flint? Is there now money flowing into your area of research?
Well, it's fascinating because when I called out Ruffalo, I actually had to protect the people that I've been fighting. But in their defense, the bad actors were largely fired. Some of them are, have been indicted or they resigned. And the vast majority of employees at these agencies are good, great people. And I see how hard they're working in Flint to help Flint get back on its feet. So, I did have to defend someone who I was calling out just a few months ago, and it's oddly enough, but what are you going to do? You work with people who are trying to be part of the solution, and you fight people who are part of the problem. And if someone changes their mind, you have to go with them. And anyone who wants to be part of the solution, you got to work with them.
Is it possible that we could have a sort of dual system of funding, where you had one side kind of that was explicitly for the public good, and then you had another that was for just more market-based science funding?
Yeah, and to some extent, we actually have that now. You might see corporate research parks growing around universities, and to some extent, that's an explicit acknowledgement that part of the business of the school is in this arena that's not in the more idealistic part of science and engineering, where we're creating, where we're helping people in seeking scientific truths.
Are there specific fields that you think, outside your own, that suffer in particular from this problem?
The one that I'm most concerned about is science and engineering. We have lost a great deal of trust with the public over the years, and this virtuous cycle is being threatened. And if we ever lose that, I really feel in my heart that we could enter a new dark age where some of the knowledge, some of the gains that we've made will be lost because people simply do not trust scientists anymore. And case in point is Flint, where this actor came to town and actually for this period of time had more credibility in the town than the combined weight of the Centers for Disease Control, the EPA, and the state of Michigan. And ultimately, I was the one that had to put on the line to try to bail out their reputation to the point that people would listen to them. So that's scary. You get to that point where some charlatan comes to town and starts spewing out pseudoscience nonsense, and people are listening to them more than the agencies who have the training and knowledge and who are there to protect the public health.
Do you see that same phenomena with climate denialism or with the vaccine movement?
Absolutely. I mean, to the extent that people have been burned by bad science, to the extent they feel that they have evidence and proof that certain scientists are not working for the public, are not working for truth or the public good, that paints all of us with a bad brush. And, the vast majority of scientists and engineers in this country, I believe, are trustworthy people. But once you reach a tipping point, especially with groups of the population, they say, that scientist did this, they are in it for themselves, they're running their university like a business. Why should we trust you? And so, and I've seen it. I've seen scientists who were betrayed by agencies ultimately become these anti-camps, where you almost get a conspiracy mindset, and you just feel science is no longer about truth, science is no longer about protecting the public good. I am going to be against science.
Yeah. I want to take a few questions from the audience, and if we call on you, if you do me a favor and state your name and organization.
Thanks, Ross. We have a question actually from one of our guests that's watching online. So we have a question via Twitter to start off. If funding was not an issue and there were not political blockages, what national issue would you put more research on?
If funding were, okay, so we're really in the science fiction
We are,
area.
yes.
Okay. Whoa, haven't been there for a while.
Yeah.
I really would be looking at fixing our academic institutions and trying to rebalance the goals of academic institutions. If we do not get that, and let me just say, I love academia. I feel being a professor is the greatest job in the world, but you criticize what you love and you fight for it. And I'm really concerned we're heading down a very, very slippery slope here. If we are running our institutions too much like businesses, it's going to end very, very badly.
And I actually have a second question from Twitter. How can scientists and engineers win back the public's confidence and faith?
So I think this is very, very important. First and foremost, you have to get out there and work with the public. This is another major problem we have with science and engineering, especially over the last 20, 30 years. We've created a world that is apart from the public, where we can feel important. And it's less and less common for scientists and engineers to work out with the public and do this bottom-up science that used to be the great model that back in the day led scientists and engineers to be the leaders, social leaders of the generation. So we need to get out of our little ivory tower and get out in the real world, and we need to be trustworthy. And I'll tell you, it's not that easy to be an ethical scientist and engineer in this day and age. These perverse incentives push you to come up to the line, if not cross the line. And so we have to be very, very careful that we are trustworthy ourselves, that these perverse incentives do not make us work against the interests of the public at any time.
We're right there.
I'm Mitzi Wertheim with the Naval Postgraduate School. How would you redesign the academic incentive system? I watch, for example, folks I know that have tenure, and they're now in their 80s, and they're not retiring, so young people can't even get into those tenure tracks.
Yeah.
My question is, what's the new design? What should it look like?
Well, we definitely have to decrease the weighting of these quantitative metrics. There's a famous law called Goodhart's Law that says once you have a quantitative metric, it ceases to be useful because people make it a target. If what you have is a system that says, here's your number of papers, and here's your number of times you've been cited, or you have an H index, which we have now, for example, people start to plot and target how they can increase their H index. That's what people do, okay? We respond to incentives. So we have to de-emphasize these quantitative metrics. We've seen it with the US News rankings. I mean, many universities have been caught cheating to inflate their scores on the US News rankings. Some leadership at universities have made it a publicly stated goal. We will move up in the US News rankings. And they have done so. They've been very, very successful. And other people look at that and say, oh, how'd they do that? We have to do that too. So these quantitative metrics, they sound good, but Goodhart's Law comes into play. Once they become a target, they cease to become useful.
Marc, this has been a great conversation.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for coming out.
Appreciate it.